Willie Nash is going to jail for 12 years, and wait till you find out why. I'm Scott Ott, and I'm with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green. This episode of Right Angle brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com, as well as our friends over at the Patriot Post, America's News Digest, and our supporters at Patreon.com/Bill Whittle. You can find links to all that in the description below. Gentlemen, Willie Nash was being booked for a misdemeanor in Newton County Jail in Mississippi. And apparently the booking didn't go the way it was supposed to, and they didn't take his cell phone away from him. However, later on, they found out that he had a cell phone on him illegally because he asked a deputy sheriff or one of his jailers if they would mind charging his cell phone. And as a result of that, he was found to be in possession of an illegal cell phone and went to court and was convicted and sentenced to 12 years in jail for that possession of a cell phone violation. He appealed this case and did not appeal his conviction because even though the judge agrees with him that he didn't know it was illegal at the time, he said, in fact, that he had broken the law, but he disagreed with the harshness of the sentence and on Eighth Amendment grounds of cruel and unusual punishment, wound up going to the state Supreme Court and basically said, look, the statute, which is Mississippi Code Section 47-5-193, lists a series of offenses, including possession of weapons, and implies that there should be degrees of offense there and therefore degrees of sentencing. The Supreme Court said no, that the court had not abused its discretion in sentencing and that the statute warns against any violation, so there's no such thing as a degree of transgression. This we all find from our buddies over at Reason.com, the libertarian publication. Stephen Green, Nash had a previous burglary conviction and then had been out and living apparently a clean life, had a wife, a couple of kids, no violations for 10 years, then commits some kind of misdemeanor and winds up now going to jail for 15 years, not for the misdemeanor, but for the possession of the cell phone. Is this just, hey, you sleep with dogs, you get up with fleas. You shouldn't have been there in the first place, or is something else going on here?
Well, let's be clear in this case. The police and the judge, they are the dogs and the fleas in this case. What a damn travesty. There's a Latin phrase that I can't remember, but it has to do with actual criminal intent, and clearly there was none here. And we see cases like this all the time. The one I'm reminded of is for about 3 months out of the year, there's a woodpecker that likes the outside wall of my house, just on the other side of my office, and this woodpecker drives me nuts. If I could shoot this thing, I would do it in a heartbeat with pure mean intent in my heart, 'cause it's just impossible to write with the tat on the wall. But the thing is, woodpeckers are protected, and there's something like a $500 or a $5,000 fine or something if you harm the woodpecker, and maybe some jail time. I can't remember exactly what the law is, so I learned to deal with a damn woodpecker. And there was a case, I think this was in Maryland a few years ago, where a young girl found a injured woodpecker, one of these protected birds, and brought it home and nursed it back to health and got fined for having interfered with the woodpecker in some way. Her intent was absolutely pure. In fact, there is probably a live woodpecker today, or whatever the bird was, that would not be alive had it not been for this little girl's efforts. And yet the government says, you broke the law, you pay the fine, you have this splotch on your record for the rest of your life, or whatever it is. And it's just insane. This man clearly had no criminal intent. He asked them to charge his phone, the phone that the police let him into the county lockup carrying. You're supposed to frisk these guys for weapons. You're supposed to frisk these guys for drugs. You're supposed to frisk these guys, yes, apparently even for cell phones, because it's illegal for them to have these things in the county lockup or the prison. But instead of doing their job and making sure this guy didn't come into prison with things he didn't even know he wasn't allowed to have. They sent him on in. If this guy had had a pistol, he could have shot somebody, and the police would have been at fault for letting him in with a pistol. They let him in with a cell phone, and then to cover their own asses, file the maximum charges against this guy for that, and the whole legal system went along with it. This is wrong on so many levels. It's the case of the little girl and the woodpecker taken to its logical extreme, and this stuff has got to stop. I would start with tar and feathering everybody involved in this thing and escalate from there if things don't change.
Bill Whittle, one of the striking things about this case is that everybody, all the way up to the state Supreme Court, agrees that Willie Nash didn't know he was in violation of the law when he took his cell phone into the jail. They all agree that the people conducting the booking procedure didn't do that properly, and so that did not relieve him of the phone. Apparently, they actually got the passcode for his phone. They didn't get his phone, because that's what happened initially when he turned over the phone and said he'd like to have it charged. Then they said, well, you've violated policy here. And at first he denied it was his phone, but then they were able to open it with his passcode, which they already had. So all of this, Bill, it seems strange that it's like the justice system says, yeah, we know we didn't do it right, and we know you didn't know you were doing something wrong. But not only are we going to find you guilty of this, we're going to sentence you to 12 years in jail, away from your wife, away from your kids, because this is the law. What kind of law is that, Bill?
I should start this by saying that when you run into a case that seems like this huge of an injustice, I would at least like to hear the argument from the side of the state, because it is so, as told, it is so flagrantly wrong that it just almost seems impossible that a decision like this could have been made not only once, but actually twice when on appeal. So for the sake of the argument, we're going to say that this happened exactly the way it is, and there are no mitigating circumstances on the part of the state or the prosecution.
Well, and as I said, the state Supreme Court said it could not find under the law that the trial court has abused its discretion in sentencing. And, by the way, since they were within their discretion of 3 to 15 years, they gave him 12 years, that he can't appeal it because he can't appeal the sentence because it was within the range.
If he were given 3 days, it would be an injustice. Yep. I don't buy that argument, and I don't know what this is other than bureaucratic CYA. It's the only thing I can imagine that would do this. Either that or just I don't know. But in any event, it is clearly a misjustice, and it bears saying that in a country where we're so often accused of all of these injustices every day, I often talk about how the progressives they've run out of injustices, so they have to manufacture synthetic injustice. Now we have one, apparently. And the people who are fired up about this are the conservatives, because it looks like the law has been misused. And I think, Scott, what it all comes down to basically is this. In a republic, you have laws that limit what the boundaries of the individual behavior are. But in a republic, you also would assume that people have enough innate virtue to know the difference between right and wrong, to know the difference between intent, and that something like this would have been thrown out not because of the legal bar. Yes, he had an object he wasn't supposed to have in prison. Yes, you're correct about that. But any society with any sense of virtue, any judge with any sense of virtue, anybody with any sense of virtue can tell that this is a misapplication of that law, and an egregious one. If you try to take away the fundamental common sense and virtue that underlines a society and have every single transaction guaranteed by guaranteed sentencing, but these are the codes and this is it, you might as well just give up right there. It's an appalling, if it is in fact happened as stated, it is an appalling miscarriage of justice, and it needs to be fought until it's reversed, at which point this man needs to be freed. And if it, again, I just have to say this one more time, if it turns out that it played exactly the way it sounded, then he needs to get out of jail, and the judge who sentenced him to that needs to go in. to put somebody in jail for 12 years for having a cell phone without knowing that he was having a cell phone, when in fact the point he has a cell phone is entirely due to the incompetence of the people running the jail, then this is a tremendous travesty, and it needs to be fought until it's reversed. And I was realized when you were making this case, Scott, that this is in fact why the designers of our government built in that final kind of circuit breaker, which is almost imperial in power, the imperial power of the president or the governor to simply say, "I pardon thee," and that's it. It's over. It often seemed to me that power of pardon was so remarkably concentrated. You've been convicted by a jury of all of these things, but I've decided you can go free. That's how it works in terms of looking at it on paper. But the genius of it is that sometimes things like this go wrong. Sometimes investigators get burrs up their butt, and sometimes juries are swayed and so on, and injustices occur. And it would be my very fond hope that people would put enough pressure on the governor to look, not to automatically pardon the guy because he got a letter, but to look into the case and to discover if in fact it is as egregious as it sounds. Then you would expect the governor to look into his own soul and with some relative simplicity, because the three of us are not having any trouble with this, come to realize that a 12-year sentence for having a cell phone in a prison, which he did not know was against the law and which it was the responsibility of the jail to remove, is a gross misjustice, and the man needs to be set free right away.
Yeah. Hey, Scott, can I say just one more thing really, really quickly here? You know, as a dad, I've got to enforce a lot of rules, and sometimes I forget, and I'll catch my kids doing something, and I'll say, "Do you know how many times I've told you not to do that?" And they'll say, "Well, Dad, last night we asked and you said it was okay." And I'm like, "Oh, well, I can't ground you for that." This is a case where the embarrassed police officer or a jail guard, whatever, should have said, "Oh my God, I can't believe I let you in with a cell phone. I hope I don't get in trouble for this." We'll just forget that never happened, right? And that should have been the end of it. Instead, this is just the worst.
Well, I'm kind of hoping that Reason.com has it wrong here, although that's not been my experience with them. They seem to be a pretty reliable, honest broker when it comes to news like this. That would be the best outcome, that there's some great aspect of this story that's missing, but they quote people from both sides of it, and they're quoting what the courts have said. It seems to me that in any sane system, if this guy was discovered to have an illegal phone that slipped through the cordon of the normal booking procedure, that the first concern would be, who's doing the booking here and what kind of processes have we given them, and how can we reform those to make sure that somebody doesn't get into the prison with a prohibited object. Now, the statute, that Mississippi Code Section 475193, groups cell phones and electronic devices with weapons and deadly weapons. So they're all listed as the same category, that they're not allowed to have those in the jail. That to me is an absurdity of legislation. So somebody wrote a statute that basically said, if you have a cell phone in jail, you might as well have a Glock. And to me, that doesn't seem to be, it's kind of like the old Sesame Street, like one of these things doesn't belong here. There needs to be not only the letter of the law, but a fulfillment of the spirit of the law. Now, if he sneaks into prison with a phone, which he intends to use to continue to conduct nefarious business outside of the prison, or he wants to use in order to escape from the prison, then you've got one thing. But nobody says that. No, everybody acknowledges that he wasn't trying to do any of that, and in fact, handed the phone over to one of his jailers and said, "Hey, would you mind charging this?" And so at some point in a system of laws but not of men, you have to acknowledge the role of men as well. You have to acknowledge, because prosecutors, for example, have discretion about which crimes they should pursue and which ones they don't feel like that would be fruitful for them to pursue. The same thing needs to happen at the jail level, where they say, you know what? Yeah, clearly he was in violation of the law, but how did that come to be? And was he doing something with that phone that he shouldn't have been doing? And those decisions are made by individuals not outside of the law, but kind of within the scope of the spirit of the law. People need to use human discretion. A judge needs to use discretion when it comes to sentencing in a case like this. If it gets to court, which I'm not convinced that it should have gotten to court based on the evidence that I see, but if it gets to court, the judge needs to look at this and say, this would be, looks like a Keystone Cops operation in checking this guy into the jail. How did this even happen? We don't want this to happen again. So I sentence the jail to develop a system of procedures that is not porous like this. And I think I would sentence Willie Nash to every day in prison that his jailers who let him in there with the cell phone are willing to sit with him side by side in that same cell. That's how long his sentence should be. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members for making this possible.